Hello my friends, Devaun Lennox here, PhotographyPX.com. In today's video, we'll do our review of the Leica Summicron-M 28mm f2 ASPH. Note you can find timestamps in the description down below. You can also scrub through this video to skip to a more relevant section if you'd like, but with that said, let's get started. The 28mm focal length is a unique but indispensable lens for photojournalism and street photography, and the Summicron-M 28mm, released in 2016, presents photographers with even more power than the original ASPH model released 9 years prior. On paper, Leica aims to bring more consistent performance throughout the aperture range, as its predecessor lacked edge-to-edge sharpness when used wide open, and they've also refined the design, but otherwise it retains many of the key strengths beloved in its predecessor. So the question here is, are these incremental updates enough to justify the new price point? And how does this lens stack up to the other wide-angle alternatives available, most of which are more affordable on the M mount? Let's find out. But first, let's quickly cover the designations that Leica uses if you're unfamiliar with them. Summicron is Leica's premium lineup of high-end lenses with a maximum aperture of f2.0. And these lenses have Leica's best manufacturing ability and uncompromised quality. Leica M, on the other, Leica M lenses are those designed for rangefinder cameras using the long-standing M mount, which originally dates back to 1954 with the release of the Leica M3. These lenses are compact, full-frame, manual focusing only, and use a bayonet-style mount. ASPH means a spherical lens element. This lens element corrects various aberrations like coma by using a high refractive index, which in turn improves the image quality. With that covered though, let's talk about this lens's build quality, construction, and design. Some general specifications first out of the way. This lens opens to f2 and closes to an aperture of f16. It uses a 46mm filter thread and weighs 257 grams without the lens, hood, and cover, and it offers a minimum focusing distance of 0.7 meters with a reproduction ratio of 1:22, and the angle of view is 74 degrees if you're curious. Internally, the Summicron-M 28mm features 9 elements in 6 groups, which is pretty sophisticated for a lens of this size, and it reintroduces a spherical lens element to reduce distortion and spherical aberration. Yet it also surprisingly has a 10-blade circular diaphragm, creating a beautiful and uniquely smooth background blur. However, it's important to note and highlight that this lens doesn't offer official weather sealing. Instead, like most Leica products, it's technically weather and dust resistant. Still, the company hasn't mentioned anything in this regard officially as far as I've found, so keep that in mind. That said, this lens is small at only 54mm with the hood. The hood, by the way, is a square screw-on design, not the traditional round pedal design used by most Japanese camera companies. It's also now metal, unlike the plastic design used by the previous generation of this lens, which many thought fell off too easily, and that's a key way to differentiate this newer generation from the older. Overall though, the general package here is quite light and only marginally larger and heavier than the Elmarit M 28mm. Both the lens and the hood of this lens also feature a high-end aluminum construction, which feels very premium and sturdy in hand. Leica also added a bottom-mounted focusing collar and an aperture ring with hard click stops to create a tactile and satisfying experience. So given its compact size and brilliant manual control, it's the perfect mate to the Leica M11, which was what we tested it on, and other M series cameras that it supports. Now with that said, let's talk about the image quality. As a fast and compact wide-angle lens, you'd assume the image quality would have compromises, but it's the opposite. The image quality and overall performance, even wide open at apertures of f2, are quite impressive. The Summicron-M 28mm renders extraordinary edge-to-edge detail, and it capitalizes perfectly on Leica's M11 high-end 60-megapixel sensor. Stopping down only further improves general sharpness and image clarity, and the improvement in resolving power and peripheral sharpness is a huge difference from its predecessor, and it's also a key strength amongst the competition of other lenses at this focal length. Yet despite its sharpness, the results never feel overdone, and you have plenty of room for post-processing if you'd like. In tough lighting situations like shooting backlit, the Summicron-M 28mm also hardly flares or suffers from distracting ghosting, and I didn't notice any chromatic aberrations when reviewing images at 1:1 detail. Plus, barrel distortion on this lens is entirely a non-issue. Of course though, at f1.4, the Summilux-M variant of this lens has a slight edge when shooting in low light. Still, having an aperture of f2 here offers an advantage over standard f2.8 settings available on most Japanese lenses, and it's indeed enough to let you reduce the ISO enough to avoid noise in most situations. As far as bokeh, it's more hazy than creamy. It's also more muted and subtle than Leica's faster Summilux lenses, but it's still pleasing nonetheless, and it renders that unique, cinematic, and hard to describe aesthetic Leica is known for. So it's unlikely you won't be satisfied regardless of your more specific preferences. Overall, there's little to fault here. The image quality on the Summicron-M 28mm produces is excellent, and it outperforms most compact lenses of this general focal length. The lens is also quite versatile when shooting in tough lighting or low light scenes, and its f2 aperture is entirely usable without any real compromises. Now for focusing performance. As a rangefinder lens, the Summicron-M 28mm offers only manual focusing, but Leica's included a focusing ring with a finger grip, which is incredibly smooth and easy to position. The focus throw is also quite short and very accurate, plus this lens also has a depth of field scale with measurements in both feet and meters, so you can know how much will be in focus at a given distance. So by using zone focusing, you can achieve precise focus quite quickly. And the wider focal length in general here gives you some room for error on that front. So overall, if you're familiar with zone focusing or you just enjoy manual focusing altogether, you won't have any issues with this lens, and focusing on this lens is quite easy. So with all this said, what are the downsides of this lens? The only potential downside that I found is the included metal hood is quite large, and it's somewhat controversial amongst photographers. Regardless though, it does help eliminate light from hitting the front element at strange angles, which will cause flare and reduce contrast. So when shooting backlit, it's still a must regardless of its bulky size. But that said, should you buy this lens? Well, at its current price, the Summicron-M 28mm isn't necessarily the most economical choice for this focal length. That would go to the Elmarit-M 28mm or the Zeiss alternatives. Still in use, it does offer a largely similar size and weight to the Elmarit variant, yet you also get broadly similar images to the higher end Summilux variant. The only exception is their low light performance really. So overall, I'd say the results of this lens strikes an interesting balance for what it's worth and offers excellent value. In the end though, the Summicron-M 28mm evolves the M lineup gracefully with a refined design and better edge-to-edge sharpness, and it stands as the best wide-angle lens for the M-mount rangefinder camera, outpacing all of its rivals in raw detail. Yet it stays true to the ethos of this focal length by remaining small, sharp, and ergonomic. As a result, it continues to be a favorite choice amongst photojournalists and documentary photographers given its versatility. So if you love a wide angle or enjoy tackling low light scenes, this is definitely a lens to consider.